The helmet is a ubiquitous item in ancient cultures. Most soldiers and fighters in ancient and medieval history wore a helmet in battle. While it was common to wear something to protect the head and face, helmet styles have varied greatly over time, giving rise to some highly effective, well-designed, and beautiful pieces. So here is the list of the 10 most effective and well-designed ancient battle helmets. 10. Mycenaean Boar Tusk Helmet. When we try to choose the best helmets, we must consider a few things from the soldier's viewpoint. For example, the mobility when wearing the helmet, the ability to breathe, see, and hear, and the helmet overheating during battle. Helmets with boar tusks were known in the Mycenaean world since the 17th century BC. They were made by using slivers of boar tusks attached to a leather base, padded in rows with felt. The upper tusks were triangle-shaped. At the top of the helmet, a circular lid was placed in ivory or bronze, sometimes used as a crest holder. This helmet is known to have been worn by the heroes who fought under the walls in the famous Trojan War. Of course, due to the material used, these helmets did not provide the same protection as a metal helmet. That is why it ranks 10th. At the time, although metallurgy had already greatly advanced, there was a lack of metallurgical processing and bronze working was still in its early days. So, it was difficult to work the metal into more complex shapes like that of a helmet. Since the bronze alloys of the time were not that advanced, working with the metals could easily cause embrittlement. The hard boar tusk was therefore a wonderful choice for protecting a warrior's head. Such tusks were not hard to come by either, as warriors were constantly participating in boar hunts. To make such a helmet, it was necessary to remove tusks from 20 to 40 boars. Therefore, some suggest that high-ranking warriors probably wore the most elaborate helmets. Also, the Mycenaeans and many other peoples saw the boar as a powerful war symbol. 9. Montaforino Helmet. The Montaforino was a Celtic and, later, Roman military helmet, worn roughly between 300 BC and the 1st century AD, with modifications over time. It was an extremely popular helmet and used mainly by the Roman Republic, but also by the Empire. Montaforino helmets are generally characterized by their conical or round shape, with a raised central knob and a protruding neck guard, and cheek plates to protect the sides of the skull. Some varieties of this helmet have no cheek plates, probably because they were made from perishable materials such as leather. Other common features of the Montaforino helmet include a rope-like pattern around the rim and a pine cone-like pattern on the ridge knob. This type of helmet was named after the Montaforino region in Italy and was primarily made of bronze. Sometimes Roman versions of this helmet contained inscriptions of the name of the soldier wearing it. In the Roman Republic, these helmets were generally more decorated, as the Republican legions were composed of soldiers who, at the time, paid to have their own equipment. As the Roman army grew during the Marian reforms in the late 2nd century BC, cheaper, undecorated, but more effective helmets were mass-produced for legionnaires, especially for the poorer ones who could not afford their equipment. This helmet fulfilled its role, protecting the soldier's head and allowing him to breathe and hear without problems. Also, vision was not impaired, and the helmet did not overheat. 8. Norman Conical Helmet. This was a combat helmet with a protruding bar that covered the nose, protecting the center of the face. It originated in Western Europe and was used from the late 9th century until at least 1250. The conical helmets worn by Norman knights were like those worn by the Romans. They were constructed with a frame of bronze or iron strips, covered with sheets of bronze or copper. A nose guard was riveted to reinforce the lower edge. A well-made conical helmet was an effective defense against swords and spears. This may not be the boldest or most protective of warlike helmets, but when we look at the silhouette, we immediately remember the Normans. Simply put, they were basically two pieces of steel joined together by a column with a large nose guard. That's it. There was no protection for the neck, so the helmet was usually worn over a mail cap, which protected the lower parts of the head, throat, and neck. The cap could be a separate item of armor, being attached to the bottom edge, or it could be formed as an extension of the chainmail. The nasals of the helmets were often so large that the wearer was unrecognizable to onlookers. 7. Greek Illyrian Helmet. The Illyrian-type helmet is a bronze helmet that in late versions already covered the entire head and neck, and was open in all its forms. It originated in ancient Greece and was developed during the 8th and 7th centuries BC. With this type of helmet, the wearer's head was more covered compared to the Montaforino Helmet, increasing the protection of the skull and neck. It also did not obstruct the wearer's vision, but early versions made it difficult to hear, a problem later solved. The Illyrian-type helmet was used by the ancient Greeks, Etruscans, Scythians, and became popular among the Illyrians who later adopted it. It fell out of use in most of Greece by the early 5th century BC. Its use in Illyria ended in the 4th century BC. 6. Corinthian Helmet. The Corinthian helmet originated in ancient Greece and was named after the city-state of Corinth. It was a helmet made of bronze, later styles of which covered the entire head and neck, with slits for eyes and mouth. A large curved projection protected the back of the head. Outside of combat, the Greek soldier wore the helmet tilted upward for comfort. This practice originated variants in Italy, where the slits were almost closed, since the helmet was no longer pulled over the face but worn as a cap. Although like the Greek Illyrian helmet, the Corinthian helmet was distinguished by the extra protection for the wearer's face. The Romans also used this design and opted for a different, more open version of the helmet. Besides being comfortable, it was an excellent helmet for deflecting spear and sword blows. The biggest drawback of the Corinthian helmet was that it was difficult for the wearer to hear, and it overheated, even more so considering the Mediterranean warmth. 5. Kettle Hat. Also known as a war hat, it was a helmet made of iron or steel, shaped like a brim hat. There are many variations in design. The only common element is a wide brim that offered extra protection to the wearer. The kettle hat was common throughout medieval Europe during the 14th and 15th centuries. Versions of it were worn during World War I and World War II. With an uncomplicated design, requiring less time and skill in production compared to other helmets, it was relatively inexpensive. It was usually worn by infantry, but also by cavalry. The wide brim protected against blows from above, such as cavalry swords, and was especially useful in siege warfare, as the wide brim would protect the wearer from projectiles fired or thrown from above. Later, kettle hats were made from a single piece of iron. It had one advantage over other types of helmets, as it did not interfere with the wearer's vision, hearing, or breathing. 4. Late Roman Cavalry Helmets. The legion men had solid functional helmets in battle, and the auxiliary cavalry of the empire opted for something bolder. There was a significant difference between the auxiliary units of the legion, as most were not Roman, and each had its own cultural style. The helmet model I will single out had masks attached. Used during the 1st and 2nd centuries, they had an ornate but highly functional design, often with mythological scenes or beasts. They also had a mask made of the same metal protecting the wearer's face, something that caused some fear in enemies. The delicate covering was too fragile to be worn during cavalry tournaments, but the thick iron core was a good defense against blows and arrows. On some models, such as the Amisa helmet, there were narrow slits for eyes, with 3 small holes to allow downward vision. There is some debate as to whether the masks were worn only in demonstrations or parades, being removed in battles, but it is likely that they were used in combat. After all, some medieval helmets had much less visibility than a Roman cavalry mask. This type of helmet was usually thick and heavy, protecting against heavy blows or arrows. It also had a protruding edge to protect the neck. 3. Kabuto. The Kabuto was a helmet worn by ancient Japanese warriors that, over time, became an important part of traditional Japanese samurai armor. Dating from the 5th century AD, the Kabuto combined dozens of thin iron plates. Generally, only the samurai in the rank of commander wore ornaments on the helmet known as tatemono in the form of a pair of shafts. As the number of large-scale group battles increased, ordinary samurai also began to wear the tatemono on their helmet to show courage or distinguish from the enemy. The kabuto was attached to the head by a chin cord. Over time, it came to include a hanging neck protector, usually consisting of 3 to 7 semicircular blades made of metal or oxhide, attached and articulated by silk or leather ties. Overall, the Kabuto protected all sides of the head, as well as being very mobile to the many different layers. 2. Hellenistic Cavalry Helmet. Also known as the Boeotian helmet, this was a combat helmet worn by the Greeks during the classical and Hellenistic periods, with origins in the Greek region of Boeotia. Using a mold, it was cast from a single bronze sheet. Being an open helmet, it allowed good peripheral vision and unimpaired hearing. It had a skull surrounded by a wide, downward-sloping brim. The brim went down at the back to protect the back of the head, protruding forward over the forehead, and was intricately worked on the sides with folds facing down. This allowed for lateral protection of the face. Sometimes a long plume was attached to the helmet. The need to have unobstructed vision and good hearing was essential for knights, and this helmet was worn mainly by mounted troops. It was used by Alexander the Great's cavalry, considered by many to be the best in the ancient world. Because it was a kind of armored sun hat, it was perfect for crossing the Asian plains in summer, and it will have been useful in helping Alexander's knights overthrow the mighty Persian Empire. 1. Imperial Golic Roman Helmet. The Romans had enormous adaptability and embraced the good things they found. The best iron helmet factories were in Gaul, and when Julius Caesar conquered it, all these production facilities and craftsmen became part of the Roman Empire. The Imperial Golic Roman helmet was a good substitute for the Montaforino Helmet, which by then had had many improved versions. And if you look closely at the helmet's design, it makes perfect sense for it to be in our first position. The Romans thought of everything: good vision and hearing for the legionnaire, protection for the back of the head against blows from below, a front visor, and huge cheek pieces on the side of the face without hindering vision. Roman combat experience in the Dacian Wars spurred new developments in helmet design, specifically the 2 iron bars riveted transversely to the skull. This helmet was widely worn between the 1st and 2nd century BC by tribunes, centurions, optiones, and regular troops. A coat of arms could also be attached, depending on the status of the person. But legionaries usually wore it without ornamentation. But what do you think of this list? Leave your opinion in the comments, and if you enjoyed it, please like the video and subscribe to our channel.